And the other book that they relied on was the Book of Nature. So this was critical. It was in early Christianity, the Book of Nature. And that was your ability to understand nature, to work with nature, to live in nature, to communicate with the animals. This is why they came up with the Book of Kells, some of the greatest books. Ireland was the centre of writing in that stage.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I am your humble servant and seafood Taoist Master Sun Qing. And yes, once again, you've heard me here before on this channel. It is Christmas morning. I come down to the tree, and another incredible being I have to be grateful to the universe is gracing us with his presence. I'm so excited to welcome him to the podcast. James, author, and what would you call yourself?
Writer, we say.
Writer.
Yeah.
I want to welcome you to the podcast, my friend. And I cannot, there aren't words right now because there's a visceral sort of like kinesthetic, like charge that we're both experiencing. And I'm feeling it very much from the heart. And whatever you're into, my friend, give me another serving of that, because it's really palpable to the audience, any of the OGs, any of the students. You can feel this expansive like connection. And it's really quite something. So welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Thank you very much, San. I've been looking forward to this conversation, not least because Taoism has been one of the important aspects of my spiritual path. I'd say that I was brought up Catholic, and it's still important and gone around the circle to some of the old stuff, Celtic Christianity. Irish indigenous spirituality is critically important, and Taoism, I'd say, is about the third one, as well as Buddhism and all the other ones, about Sufism, whatever. But I've always had a soft spot, so it's great to talk to someone that knows about it as opposed to my amateurish way. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it's really funny how it's kind of universal. We sort of get these gradients of all different sort of like, peaks into the consciousness crystal ball of who we are. And, it happens to be that most people tend to find through just general conversation to some degree that, oh my goodness, there's a slither of this sort of Taoist sort of like concept of reality that I really resonate with. And then, of course, it depends on how deep you go, but it can go from a concept to a belief system. It really depends on what resonates with you, to what degree, or how much you want to embody it. I feel like there's over history, like anything else, really profound, visceral, kinesthetic things like, spoken word, written word, scripture, ancient text gets sort of doctored and manipulated over time. So there's this sort of like diluted version of a lot of these sort of things over history. What are your thoughts on that?
I've been to China a number of times, and when I was over there, I was seeking out the Taoism, as well as I was lecturing over there at a high level. I was invited by kind of powerful people over there. But in my spare time, I wanted to go to the Shaolin Temple and to some of the Taoist places. And of course, with the Cultural Revolution, we know that a lot has been destroyed. A lot of people don't understand that. And a lot of Chinese people don't know anything about Taoism. And so I was kind of surprised that you have to kind of work at it. So you're right in relation to, of course, the scriptures, the range of scriptures. So anyone with any interest will have read the main scriptures, the Tao Te Ching and Lao Tzu, the book of Lao Tzu, and the Zhang Zhe, whatever way you want to pronounce it, and those texts and the various collections, and the Yellow Emperor, as well as around the penumbra in relation to traditional Chinese medicine. So that's there, but we know that if in all the mystical traditions, as they say in some of the older traditions, in the Jewish tradition, for example, that the literal meaning is the darkest. And Swedenborg, his main argument was about developing the underlayers within the text, that we think we know what the text is. So even if we have the proper text, which is difficult with translation and that, we have all the great difficulties of the interpretation. But I think that through the, now I call it Tao, so because of when I learned it first, nobody was talking about, and that was the way I learned in Dublin in a kind of autodidactic way, informing myself about the Tao. And when you say it in Tao, funnily enough, then it echoes more in a number of different English words. Dowsing, which is strange, the phonetic kind of a more equivalent, or even the Irish word douse is to dance. So it's a kind of a universal, or there's elements of it, of course, the pronunciation varies, but so it's always difficult. We're always a few steps away, but you can definitely get the sense from the Tao Te Ching when you read it. And the first time I read it, you say, well, this person, this is true as an indicator. Of course, it is an indicator of something else, as it says itself, but it's pointing in the right direction. It's clear in that, and you get that sense. I mean, it's always been important for me. It's always been clear, but to a certain extent, you knew it beforehand. When you come to it, you know that it's true because your instincts, it accords with your instinct. Now, the word I use, and I wrote a book called The Mystical Accord to explain my approach to mysticism as a universal phenomenon. So the mystical accord. So the word accord is an equivalent to some of the things you talk about frequency and resonance. So with the sense that you have to come into accord something. Well, first in yourself, in the various elements, and then accord with other people, with nature, with the bigger stuff, with the Tao. So my instincts are very, very close to that anyway. And I think to a certain extent, the Tao, traditional Irish culture, which still a lot of people don't kind of know about, and it's dying now. It's really under attack. It has been under attack for hundreds of years, but they were appealing and informed by the same great memory. Now Yeats, this kind of echoes. Well, I heard a bit of a conversation with Thomas Campbell when I was listening to some of your talks, and you talked about or you asked him about his sense of how it works in relation to, and he talked about the database and communicate with the database. Well, Yeats kind of rehearsed this view on magic in 1902, and he was informed by the Irish traditions that he had discovered through translation and through meeting the peasants, the poor people. And he described it thus. He said that there is a great memory, and the magician works through symbols to access the great memory. It's a very simple explanation, very elegant, but it's the same thing. So there's a universality about these things. So when you come, of course, to the chief metaphors, images, ideas in Taoism, and there's studies, we don't need studies, but if they corroborate what one's instinct is, that you see it. The dominant metaphor is water and growth and relationships. And of course, we have the yin and the yang and the dark side and bright side and what comes from that. But in relation to water in the Tao Te Ching itself, it's a critical thing. So what I would argue is that there's a universality that one can detect. And even if there's elements that are not true, the sense of it is there. And then when we bring in different elements that could have been dispersed as well through different Oriental cultures, in relation to the elements, the 5 elements, traditional Chinese medicine, the dragon paths. There were similar things in Ireland in relation to the earth, the ley lines. There were similar ideas. So there was a sense. And we also have to anticipate that if you go back and look at someone like Steiner, they believed that the adepts in various countries were communicating with each other. Why wouldn't they? Because they were accessing some of the similar things. So in the Irish context, for example, years ago I got the chance to be inside Newgrange. Newgrange is 5,000 years old. So this is, and my people come back from Ireland as long as it can be. So on the shortest day of the year, sun shines over an extreme point in the horizon and comes in through a roof box into the center of this mound and shines in a beam of light really only on that day. So this was built 5,000 years ago, unifying the Mother Earth and the Father, Son, light, whatever, with the sun, around the time of which became Christmas. There's deep connections, and you see the spirals. If you go and look at the religious texts, the text the monks did, you can see kind of yin yang symbols. Of course, the Romans had them on their shield early on, some of the oldest ones that they have found. So there's a universality. So I would say that the universality awareness helps you identify, what's sound. And then I did a little bit of Tai Chi. I did a little bit of Qi Kung. I did a little bit of, well, quite a bit of karate, not in a way to get belts and all that, but with a black belt who's kind of high level black belt. And this fella that taught me, so it's just me and him. So he was very much into Chinese philosophy. He did a PhD on Taoism and accountancy and management accountancy. So that's so he could approach it at that level. But he was about the chi and the ki, and although it was in the Japanese form, a lot of the Oriental forms come from these. They were taken. So you can see those elements. I did a bit of judo as well. And judo, the gentle way, the spirit. You can see that. You can see the philosophy coming through it. So that's an embedded, real thing that's handed down, and as well as. I've always had a great experience with Chinese people, so I hate these ideas of projecting onto the Chinese people that have suffered throughout history, what bad rulers have done, and the people blame Chinese people. And with Chinese people, that is embedded in their ordinary culture, there's elements that they work. So what I would say is that one can get a sense, an attitude. And then there's more people like yourself who have studied it in depth and are able to separate the wheat and the chaff and can give directions at different levels. And then, of course, there's a multiplicity of approaches within Taoism. As I'm not telling you that, but just stating that. And, so you have things that people are less familiar with, like an occult tradition, which is, sorceress or whatever. You have the immortality stream and the experimental thing and the alchemical thing. And I was most interested in the various phases, but in particular the phases when they went to the mountains. That was the thing that resonated with me. And often we see this where there's something going on in the empire, and certain bunches will say, okay, we're leaving this, we're going out. And it's in those contexts where the observation of nature comes from. This is the greatest strength of Taoism. Of all the traditions, it's the one which is most imbued with an understanding of the natural world and our how to interact with that. And also in the different types of magic. I think, for example, Catholicism is good at what's described as divine light magic. And there's various classifications, but natural magic as the core of our relationship to the environment, Taoism has been very good at that. That's what its real base strength is, as a connection between the heaven and the earth. And in my approach, what I want to do is that, or what I want to see for me, is the next level of evolution, which I know you're interested in. And I saw your conversation with Father Nathan, because I enjoyed that, because this is the stage of development where we have two priests come from two traditions and discuss at a higher level. It doesn't mean that you have to forget your tradition or hide your tradition.
Jim, are you there?
If the people come respectfully, well, then we can begin to find the accord at the higher level. And this is what we need, because there's an attack on all spiritual tradition. So what I would say is that, at least whether it's an accurate sense, through reading over the years, studying, discussing with various people, trying to do some of the things, the practices, trying to implement the things, even if they're, as I said, like Japanese one, informed by, you get a sense which you can trace back to a lot of the sense of Taoism. And for me, out of that, I've got something that was relevant to me, that informed me, that complemented the other things. Because you have to be either this thing or that thing, and you can't be something else. Now, that's not the path, as we know. As I've said in the mystical accord, there are many ways to the way, and I think that we can come informed by the genius of each tradition and try and find a language to interact and explain where actually what you're saying is not as different. And if you understand the thing in a proper way, you can get a sense, and I'm not saying this, and your principles don't necessarily, offend this. So this is the other one of the great values that you see in Taoism, of softness, and yielding quality. And it's a difficult thing for people to understand, the Wu Wei and all that, but also the association of softness with life, and of course death, with brittleness and with heart and stiffness, and that deep insight has a relevance in relation to intellectual doctrines as well. This is my thing, and that I'm very I'm stuck with that, and it has to be this way, and that's a dangerous thing. Don't say you give up your tradition. It's the opposite. The traditionalist movement and the perennial philosophy says, in order to be able to contribute and to understand the general thing, you have to come with some background, whatever it is, whether it's Islam or Taoism or Buddhism or whatever. Come with your own tradition and deepen your knowledge of that, and then come up through it, because the source is the same, and the destination will be the same as well. So there will be commonalities, and that's what we have to find. And all of the perennial philosophies are superior to a philosophy that people don't realize they have, and they have a nihilistic agnostic thing that stops them developing, because that is a view. It's a view that's been sold historically by science. So, sorry for going on so long. The answer, I think, is eclectically that there are sources that can inform one, and sometimes one needs to be informed at different stages in one's life. One can appreciate things. There's a benefit to being older, as I know. Anyway, you have some experience. You're more interested in different things. So some things will be useful when you're younger, some things will be useful middle age, some things, whatever, it depends. So do I know the thing? What I would say is that everything that I have read in the key texts about Taoism, subject to all the qualifications, subject to the idea that something may be wrong, there's mistranslations, even wrong things, that you get a sense of a very incarnated, an incarnated philosophy, religion, whatever way you want to call it. A way is the best word, of course. You have an incarnated way that deals with the human embodied in the flesh, in nature, and appreciates the need to adapt to it, as opposed to imposing our will on the thing. And therefore those values shine through, and you kind of know when you see them, and you can detect when things are not as relevant to those central goals. So that would be the way I'd put it.
Yeah, I mean, it really is part of the old question, can we all get along? Well, of course we can all get along. We can all embody each other's understanding of what the other person's truth is. And I think I really love to embrace places of worship, other belief systems, other religions, whatever it may be, because there's this visceral experience that takes place when you're in that space, when that person is sharing their perception of reality and what it means to them, and what you're embodying this sort of like resonance, and it's palpable. Just as the conversation we're having right now, it's like it is palpable, it is expansive, and we get on deeper levels. I just finished in deep basically training with Latsu, and we just finished I just transcribed his 2024 version of the Tao Te Ching.
Interesting.
And this is really a doozy, my friend. For you, I'm going to send you a copy. You're gonna love it, because it within the deep nature of Taoism, which a lot of people don't really understand, because as you referred to it earlier, there has been this timeline through human history where people don't know that there's been this incredible genocide within the Chinese culture with megalomaniacs that have literally slaughtered millions of their citizens, and fallen on deaf ears, where there's certain points in the history, a timeline, like the charge we're getting right now. It's like that realization, that timeline from previous people are leading towards certain historical events, but they don't even reference the slaughter of over 60 million Chinese citizens. And with that was swept up the destruction, the deconstruction, the dissolving of all things cultural within, the Chinese landscape, one being the very seed of Taoism and how powerful it is. And my Mandarin teacher was translating this very transcription that I got from Lao Tzu, and she was in tears. She was in tears because she remembered. It was like, I've never had anyone make me feel so emotional about bringing myself back to it when I was a child, and I was briefly exposed to this most powerful scripture and what it meant to me. And it's just bringing up all this stuff, all this really beautiful stuff, but I'm so emotional about it because it's true to me and it resonates. It's like this whole, part of like talking about the levels of magic, and magic in of itself, I think, gets put in this esoteric categorizing, sort of like this mystical path for people that are truth seekers. Yet there's the esoteric part, which really is fueled and fundamentally by what I've observed as a lot of people that are in their intellect, not their intuitive state, which just makes them separate from the very messaging of what it is that they're pursuing, whatever level of magic, sigils, grimoires, whatever it is that they're getting involved with, they're not able to replicate it or translate it into their physicality, their 3D reality. This doesn't have to be some sort of like script for Harry Potter's Hogwarts. This stuff is very real and has been going on for thousands of years. And when you get someone to help you find that remembrance, it becomes revealed to you. And the power of that is in the very words, in the very instruction, the construct of that. And if it's not diluted by a realm of man, sort of like a delusion that has taken over the history timeline, where you go back to, what people have considered the seed or the beginning of Chinese culture as you know it. I go deeper when I go deep into conversation with my teachers, everyone from the Lao Tzu to Yellow Emperor to Jade Emperor to the Three Pure Ones. I just get direct source. And then people are like, well, Jeffu, you said that there's no absolute. And, if you're telling me that I don't need to learn it from a book, all I'm sharing with you is when I get this information and you read it and you resonate with it, it's true to you. There is no absolute. The second you find an absolute in anything is problematic in of itself, because there's a million ways up the mountain. There is no right or wrong. And from a deep fundamental understanding about the Taoist path and the yin and yang is each side of the mountain, you move up the mountain and you merge it as one, all things, the mother of all things, the Tao. And so this is sort of like an accepting and allowing that sort of like people are like, how can you do this? I'm like, I promise you, you'll find yourself more charmed than you've ever experienced in your reality when you start to embody the concepts and the wording that we're sharing with you today. But more to the Taoist vein is a lot of the stuff historically has been diluted or misdirection, even right down to the Yellow Emperor's canon. I can have a deep conversation with him and extract real the stuff I teach, real alchemical processes that will bear you a result in this 3D reality that is not a figment of your imagination, where the depth of it is so far removed from the true source of all things that, it's evident in whatever you get out of it. That's really what it comes down to. It's like, are you contracting or expanding? What are you receiving out of it? And I will always ask the adventurer, the person that is inspired to be evoking some level of consciousness from our conversation, from a journey within this path of awareness, however you see your reality, to possibly consider that when it's not resonating with you, that this potentially could be an initiation of your intuition telling you, maybe I need to go in another direction. That rather than sitting with someone who's sort of identified themselves as an authoritarian of this state, of this religion, of this belief system, that if it's not resonating with you, and I seem to find a lot of these people that end up on my doorstep, where I spent 3 years in a Buddhist monastery and in the lotus position, and I ended up with back pain and chronic issues that I'm still working out today, and that was 20 years ago. I didn't receive an enlightenment. And then I think it's the perception of that. Wait, what are you entering the game or the simulation, or how you perceive your reality? At what entry level are you at? Where are you at I just had an epiphany, something's inspiring me to just go out and start reading the Tao Te Ching, or maybe the Bible is resonating with me, or I just got a vision of Jesus and it's just like rocking me to the core. And all these things are all valid expressions of something knocking on your doorstep. And when you start filtering this information for yourself, or find someone that can share a method, and all I suggest and I offer to the audience is, find yourself a method to validate what it is you're experiencing, so that you can enrich and expand your journey in this lifetime, however that may be. There is no right or wrong way. And I think you brought the attention of the audience through your experiences, that this is the very limiting sort of like starting point for a lot of people. My football team's the only football team, and my way is the only way. And I always find that people will end up by a doorstep and they're like, I've had the Tao Te Ching by my bedside my whole life. It just resonates with me. And I think that is profound, because that is true access, in my opinion. And within Taoism, I think a lot of people forget the basic starting point of this, and which I personally believe across all belief systems and religions, they start with direct source channeling. And so you're like, hang on a second, what are you really? Yes, Taoism was seeded from channeling direct source information. And what does that really mean? It means that when you take that information and you apply it within what you consider your 3D reality, it has an effective expansion. Now, what that means to you will be variable. It depends on what you're experiencing and what your perception is. But generally speaking, the Taoists have cultivated this alchemical processes where you can really replicate what it is you're experiencing, and it becomes more finite and more subtle and more refined to the very second by second experience you're having. And it will make sense to a Taoist. It will make sense to the person that's pursuing that, as would any other text, any other scripture, any other system that you get into a knowing. And I always come back to the simplicity of, if you're thinking, you're not knowing. If you're knowing, you're feeling. And so, but the deeper channeling part that we went into within the Tao Te Ching, basically the entry before we go to what we call the magical register. And some people are like, what? Yes, the Tao Te Ching is the magical register. And they're like, holy, why do I feel something when you say that? Because when you read it, every verse is an incantation. Every verse has 81 levels to it. And within those 81 levels, there's an actual frequency. And they go, I don't know what you're saying, but it absolutely resonates with everything. I don't know how that is or what it's crazy. And, you know, I started sharing this decades ago, just in passing conversations. And most people are like, oh, whoa, whoa, tell me more. What does that even mean? And now it's going to be published so people can actually dive deep into it and really get an understanding and experience the profound realization of healing in any way, shape, or form, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. When you immerse yourself in that scripture, it's going to be a whole new version of what you perceive as reality. I think I'll take a pause here right now.
Yeah, after opening up so many avenues there, that I have to. I don't know which one to go down.
Go for it, my friend.
Just before I forget, it's interesting, for example, that in some Western thinking, the dragon is perceived as negative, and this is an interest in relation to the Chinese dragon. But then again, if you look a bit deeper, the representation of the dragon in the West is not necessarily a true kind of true in its own terms. So they can easily be reconciled, or they're not as antithetical as people might initially consider. In relation to China, if you read Steven Pinker's book on civilization, or the better angels of our nature, and he has at the back of it a list of the most dangerous or the most brutal wars with the greatest casualties over history, which in relation to the population at the time, and it's always where you don't want to live on that is in the Orient. According to that, it's not in the West as people think. The figures from early wars going back hundreds of years are a huge amount, massive. And this is an interesting thing which is forgotten now in context of discussion about about how the world is going. But that's the evidence, and so obviously there's a great resilience in relation to the people that survived these things. They saw terrible things, but they survived, and I see that in Ireland as well, because I'm talking to people who would have known people that survived a famine. You know, 1 million people dying on a small island, 1 million people emigrating. It's not as well as all the other stuff that went on. So in many senses, people get too rosy-eyed expecting the world to be nice. This is the nature of reality, and we have to look at how people survived these things in the past, and the skills and the values, and why they chose these things to sustain them in their resilience. If we look back at early Celtic Christianity, for example, and you read about the life of Columba, who my father's family would go back to or related to, but so he was. There was a significant event or era around 536 to 540 when the volcanoes erupted, and this had, in my view, a big influence on the Druids accepting Christianity, because obviously if you're a Druid in Ireland and the skies are covered with volcanic ash and the sun is not shining, and the sun is what you have power over, well, then there's a question mark over your efficacy. And there was also certain diseases knocking around at the time. But I believe that was why they led, where you have the Celtic symbol of the cross and the sun united. So it was syncretism. So the early, what these early guys had when they're in Christianity was a very simple idea of Christianity. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, and they're talking about how people approach the Bible. They didn't have any. There was only a handful of Bibles knocking around there. They weren't reading. They weren't sitting down with. That never happened. That's the scribes did, and the high, but they weren't reading all these old texts, and so they took the story of Christ and simple elements of it, and applied it and unified it with their existing culture, and in that way maintained a lot of the pagan cultures, the pre-existing cultures, and enforced them, integrated them into the religion. And if you look at the life of Columba, if we accept his nephew's report as correct, and I do, that he's dealing with shining beings that come down. He'd no problem dealing with all these shining beings, angelic beings that used to come down. He knew what was going on at distance. He could remote view, and every kind of parapsychological power, psychic power, he had them. You had to have them in order to displace the existing ones. So all the stories of the early saints involved this use of magic. They had this, so it was there in the Catholic tradition, and they were the ones that, of course, in the Dark Ages, brought the learning back to Europe. So, but there was no inconsistency. It was only later that the centralization began to put us out. Same as you have in China, forces towards the center, centripetal forces which displace external forces. So, one of the most representative texts of early Christianity, in my view, was by an Irishman called Erugena, Erugena, if you want, in the 9th century. He's been described as the greatest philosopher of the 9th century, although we couldn't, not many others would spring to mind. But anyway, so if you read about his description of God, it's an apophatic idea. It's God cannot be, because God is above all this. God it can't be identified with any quality. God is beyond. So you're getting into a very, very similar sense that you have in Taoism. So it's very reconcilable with what you have in the sacred scriptures in the Chinese context. And I believe that this was more representative. It was later that there was projections on an oversimplifications that I don't think is borne out by the great theologians who were also embedded in nature. And in his book, there's two ideas. We have the book of religion that gives you the simple, and that would mainly be, of course, the New Testament, not the Old Testament, because they didn't, it was much harder to get access to the whole thing, and they didn't have time to. The New Testament was the key in the stories and the pictures. And the other book that they relied on was the book of nature. So this was critical. It was in early Christianity, the book of nature. And that was your ability to understand nature, to work with nature, to live in nature, to communicate with the animals. This is why they came up with the Book of Kells, some of the greatest books. Ireland was the center of writing in that stage. Gaps in spacing came from the monks in writing. They didn't exist before that, and they helped sustain the Latin language because they knew it. They hadn't been invaded by the Romans, so they had to learn it, and they learned it when other people forgot it. So they knew Latin and Greek, and that's why some of them were involved in the translation of Greek text with the mystical text coming from Greece. But what I would say is that the nature thing was there, which links it more back to what we see as authentic in the Taoist tradition, but also the conception of what the higher force is a lot more open, which is also consistent. So I think there's a useful synergy to be got if people inform themselves of what their tradition actually is, because some of the recent projections of the tradition are not necessarily traditional, and there is stuff that are there that can show, in my view, I hope to show in the future, that all great perennial philosophy comes to similar things. They come to similar views about the importance of nature, about coming into accord with nature, resonance with the universe, the unseen world, and the higher forces. And in some way, if you want to put it in the Islamic term, submission to the higher force doesn't mean you give up your will. It means you come into accord with it. And that was a great essay by another Irishman, Northern Irishman, C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis, of course, he's remembered for his kind of contribution towards modern Christianity and his re-examination. But when he came to write his great essay about the abolition of man, the tradition that he described was the Tao. So he used the Tao, and he said, and he used this as the example. He said these principles are the same in all traditions, but he specifically chose the Tao to refer to the general idea in relation to a divine consciousness that we come into accord with. He specifically chose that, and I mean that's a kind of strong and deliberate choice from a very, very specific thinker. And he said we're facing the abolition of man, of humankind, and he was very aware of that. He understood that scientocracy was coming. So this is coming, and it's coming because of an attitude, and the attitude was a failure to understand the Tao. And for him, that meant that in all the perennial philosophies, the idea is that the human has to come into accord with nature and the divine sources. And what had happened, particularly with the scientific revolution, Reformation, whatever, the Enlightenment, what had happened was that humans said, we can impose our will on it. And that's the difference. And he believed that the logical outcome, and he knew what was happening, of this view of the will is that, well, it's utter destruction of humankind and the literal abolition of humankind. So what he took out of that was that general idea. And of course, the we call it sorcery in relation to a dark, where you're using it for malignant forces. It's inherent in that scientific mind view. It's inherent in the idea of the superhuman. It's inherent in the Nietzschean view. It's not against using the will, but it's against using the will in a way which is divorced from the higher force, that doesn't resonate, that believes that it is the higher force. That is the great flaw that C.S. Lewis identified. So I think we have to look at these correspondences to realize that we have to listen to different, what appear to be different people. There may be people listening that don't know as much about Taoism, or not as interested, maybe as I was, but certainly not as well. You're interested in it. And they may, they may put it into a box, but it's you can't do that. We have to be open at this stage, moving into what I have argued. I argued two streams in my work. That one, there's been a failure of spiritual evolution, and this is the cause of all our problems, which is corrected by spiritual evolution. And that secondly, the existential threat to all humanity is through our mistaken approach with that philosophy to technology, and a specific doppelganger dragon that's manifesting, which seeks to, or Steiner talked in terms of the Ahrimanic force, which you saw in science, which seeks to eradicate our humanness. And so it's what I'm trying to do, so last point, what I'm trying to do is not, you as I gather are working with people, and you're directing yourself at that, as far as I can understand, or you have some specialism in that, and I can hear from the way you talk that you have a good knowledge of psychology, and awareness of psychology, and application, and a therapeutic sense of how these things are applied. My desire is to try and articulate the whole picture, so we can begin to see the various benign dragons and negative dragons on a global level, which is difficult, which is what is actually manifest out there. What are the forces that specify, which threaten us existentially in all spiritual traditions. Every spiritual tradition is under threat because they want to abolish that. And I mean, this is so. We have a dark incentive to cooperate, to move to the next level that can be positive. So that dark force can be the one that will take us out of the chrysalis. We can stay in the chrysalis, and that what happens to the larvae or whatever in the chrysalis, if they allow, they begin to get poisoned by their own juices, or we can escape and become the next level, the butterfly of our own accord, not with technology as the thing which changes us.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, human history would be an observation and evidence of the cyclical transformation of ideas from spirituality to atheism to religion, and we go over these cycles. People just from generation to generation forget. They have these moments where all of a sudden they're looking down the barrel of, oh my goodness, Vanilla Ice is a profound prophet, an incredible music composer, and I've never seen anything so enlightened and profound in originality. And in essence, this is the cycle that we're stuck in, is that Vanilla Ice moment where, we forget the roots of where this stuff comes from, and the how ancient the nature and the profound understanding of that, even going back like 400 or 500 years ago, where guess what, within the science model was magic and mysticism and spirituality and all these other elements that they were playing with. And then they were like, oh, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's just go back to this matter stuff that seems so, it just functions with this whole Newtonian model. We need to just get rid of the idea that, there's something greater out there. And with that, we get caught up in this sort of like misdirection, basically delusional state that people get in, that they don't even realize they're in a delusional state. This is my reality. This is what I'm experiencing. I'm living my truth. I'm living, and this brings us right to the scripture, and the scripture is very clear. When you force something, it will hold and then it will break. And so then you go a little deeper, and it's very evident, it's self-evident, when you act in virtue, you have none. And so hang on a second, and people are like, what? This sounds like some type of like cryptic messaging. No, not really. I think one of the beginning entry levels for any sort of like person that wants to level up in what they've perceived as a greater sense of awareness, consciousness, however they see it, is starting to understand what is framing my lens, what is framing my reality, and does it really resonate with me? Not the words, not what someone else has told me, but what am I experiencing that would identify and validate this very moment, this very information, this very experience, this person in front of me that is sharing something that is either making me contract or expand. And so I think the first point of understanding this journey, and whatever resonates with you, whatever scripture, whatever belief system, is to, within Taoism, we get this stuff out of the way really quickly. In relation to a dear friend of mine who's a Buddhist monk, he refers to it as the dukkha, the distortion of what reality is. And, that would start with the human's inability to identify with themselves other than the flesh and blood they see before them. The reflection in the mirror is who they really are. That would be the first mistake, and the very limited sort of perception of what is. And if you're looking deeper, that's probably one of the first things you want to take that rock off and go, oh, consciousness is, or I am, right here, right now. That means there is no title, place, person, or thing. It's this present moment. And that does not limit me to this physical body, which reminds me of a very, very clear message from Jade Emperor, which he always reminds me: when you believe you are not of this body, what could harm you? Nothing. And it's like, okay, so now it's programming, right? And so we couldn't both, acknowledge that thousands of years ago, there was a point where someone had attuned themselves with a level of information. They transcribed it, and they created some belief system, religion, whatever it is, and they were able to repeat it in their reality, showing people, hey, I can craft this into something really profound that can alter you however you see it, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. And then probably in those days, maybe they weren't even thinking that deeply, but it was an effective change. And now we have this sort of situation where I agree with you. We're at a precipice of this resonance that has to continue to elevate. Dear friend of the channel, Alexis from Ascension Diaries, a channel that she specializes in reading the Schumann resonance of the earth. And she goes into going, hey, well, we're normally at a 7.83, an average, which to anyone that doesn't understand that would be replicating the brainwave of a sort of a theta alpha state of being, that if you were to transmit that from your own brain, that's where you're at. Now, not conceptually, I realize that I know it, but let's just say conceptually, if you want to just take it at that face value, you are the earth is you. It resides within this magnetic field that transmits all things. And so the theory, which I know is not a theory, the truth is, when the earth resonates at a higher frequency, or whatever frequency it's at, it will affect all the people occupying the space. And so what she came to realize was, holy moly, there's something that's not natural that's interfering with the Earth's resonance. And it's taking it from a 7.83 to anything above, for the audience, anything above 8 starts to enter into what we call a beta state. And a beta brainwave can, occupy your state of, they're sitting between 13 and 14 hertz up into, 20, in the 20s, just before they enter into a gamma. So basically, if you want to understand the messaging of some foreign agent that's manipulating the actual resonance of the Earth, it's coming in at a state where most people are going to live in anxiety and fear and highly anxious, is sort of the replication of high beta. A myopic sort of over-focused state. It's not an enlightened state where your gamma, which would then present a full consciousness where you envelop all things and you can access alpha, delta, epsilon, and be one with all things, which is a really powerful brainwave. No, there's something that's interfering, and she says a little problematic, a little concerning, that there's something going on here which is not natural in its representation. And then going a little deeper, she also can see that there is going to be a very extended period of time within the Earth's field that is presenting itself in the high 40s to 50s to even 60 hertz, which would be representative of the messaging of a lot of psychics and clairvoyants that are prophesizing the idea that we're going to have this conscious collective. And I believe there's a degree of that between yourself or myself or many people I have conversations with. There's a heightened sense of awareness that's coming with just this conversation, and it's happening around the globe, of people that are, as you would say, waking up to something greater than what they perceive as the reflection in the mirror. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm jotting down there. You've got me off on so many points. I call this the mystic murmuration. So as birds fly together and one influences 7 around a little, and they go this direct, and they do that, of course, for joy of it, and to confuse predators, the same as fish do. So my view, what is happening is that the connections are forming of this new force, if you like, a spiritual force, and it will be based on no organization. There can't be any organization. We know that would be supported by Lao Tzu and that. No organization is put by resonance, by natural resonance. And this was anticipated by a European mystic that wrote about the Congregation of Light a couple of 100 years ago, that said that the mystics would come together when needed, and the mystic recognizes one another. So I don't have to look at your CV in order to identify that you reached a certain thing. So they recognize each other, and then they can begin to not again change, re-engineer each other's point of view, but complement and give insight and a little nudge here and there to each other in relation to the growth of or influence of a non-violent invisible army. And this non-violent invisible army is really everybody that's going to have to finally address the fact that we've been dealing with. It's gone on for a long time, but hundreds of years, the growth of this destructive complex that intends to destroy us, which will lead to the fact that we have no option, but we can't go to the mountains now. You cannot escape this. So good luck to anyone that does, but in relation to actually dealing with this thing, we will have to cooperate, and we will have to move a different level. And the people will have to come out of their chrysalis, they will have to come out of their kennel, they will have to contribute. And this is the essence of what spiritual activity is. And this will begin to raise the vibration. That is happening, and it has to happen, and it has to. Now, when I say challenge, there's different ways to challenge. It has to be advocacy, persuasion, example, influence, all the good things. It doesn't have to be. I come from a tradition where my father's family, whatever, they were involved in political violence before they got into parliament and all this. They were involved in fighting against this thing. And they were involved for a long time in that. And they were very Catholic as well. There was no inconsistency. They're very, very gentle. I remember talking to one of my father's uncle. Very, very gentle, soft-spoken, kind. Wouldn't hurt a fly, but he was out shooting, at whatever. So they weren't. That was part of the context. But those methods won't work if they have ever worked over the. We really need a mass movement, a mass alignment, which begins to convince the people of the errors of their path as well, the people that are in these systems. All of these advances, in the form in which they're happening, are designed to imprison us. Artificial intelligence. I've 2 recent books, and the third one I'm writing now on it, comes from this context. It's not designed to make life easier for you. Smart dust, I'm writing at the moment. So this is coming into your body and consciousness with a technology that works to get on your nerves, literally, to control your nerves. That can be administered through water, transdermally, dropped from the sky. And Steiner warned about this. Our capacity for spiritual functioning will be impaired. And that's transhumanism as well. As Harrington, who she has argued that the contraceptive pill, for example, is transhumanism because it represses the normal function of the human body. So it's changing the nature. But there was a similar idea in Steiner that there would be medical intervention to stop our spiritual awareness. And they know they can correlate parts of the brain. So it's the same as if you are drunk and you're intoxicated and your mind doesn't function in a particular way. If you're in that state all the time, because we can induce it through kind of neural changes, which they can do now. The technology is there; it's in the past, and it can be assumed very, very easily in carbon nanotubes, etc. So this is a real threat. This is why we have to respond at that level and at the lower level. And I'm not a miserabilist, or I'm not a misanthropic. I'm not a pessimist. At least I'm a realist. These things are happening, and I'm very, very optimistic about human nature. I love humans. I'm not going to their behavior needs to be improved. But in relation, I don't have this great deep misanthropy which is around. I don't have this great deep depression about the incredible world that we're in. It's a beautiful place that we're in, despite all the problems. Our existence is incredible. And when we look at even from a scientific perspective, the fine-tuned universe and the fine-tuned constant 1 to 137, and the number 137, which is very, very important, which you can see in all the religions. You can see it in Taoism as well. The 1, 3, and 7 as well as different. It's in the menorah. It's in the Catholic Church. It's the same principle, and that's in science. That is in the figure that intrigued Pauli and it intrigued Carl Jung and Richard Feynman, and they knew that it was a secret to the universe. But it's the thing that mystics have been saying about this hierarchy, this structure. We're in an incredible universe. So although I see great forces which are malign forces, which are dangerous forces and destructive forces. This is the very reason why we have to unleash and unlock the potential that we have, and why I support as well this facilitation of other religious and spiritual perspectives, because we know from the books, for example, New World Order by H.G. Wells, not a conspiracy theory, it's a book he wrote, The open conspiracy was the other one where he tells us it's an open conspiracy to rule the world by scientific elite, to do away with democracies, and to have a bio-directorate that can control the world. And that's happening now, the World Health Organization. This is what he told us was going to happen, because he was involved in it. So they're against, and he clearly wants to get rid of the family, the nation state, and religion. It's one reason why I support religion, because for their reason, they don't want opposition. They don't want any kind of opposition to it. And apart from the fact that we need to be involved in spiritual evolution and to bring to the next level. So I don't think we can shy away from the great dark forces, and we have to look that in the eye, the dark dragon in the eye, in order to begin to assert the positive force. But the positive force, when it's unleashed, as it's unleashed, will, and it's going to take time, because a lot of the moves have been made, planned for. We've been told about this 100 years ago, what they were going to do, to change the human body into a silicon machine, to do away with human birth. And that was what Huxley was telling. A lot of the people that are telling us about this dystopia are warning us, because they've heard from the horse's mouth what the plan is. And some of these guys have put it on the table, particularly in the 20s in Britain. So it's in that context that we have to begin to begin to focus on our power. Now, there's a little point here that comes to mind when I hear some of the recent debate. It's about the nature of belief, and there's a bit of a mistake that people make in relation to the belief in the potential of something and the belief wholesale in a dogma, which is different. And the first one is the openness, and that's what I think a Taoist view, or any traditional view, you be open to the potential. And it's very, very interesting in Christian terms. Jesus is in the cross, and he has the two robbers there. And one robber says, I think on the left, we'll take it on the left for the purposes of this illustration. On the left, and it says, well, if you're a God, come down off the cross and show your power. And the other guy that says, well, he didn't do anything wrong. We did, but I believe that I believe that you are what you say you are. Now, he couldn't have known what the thing is, but he had a belief in the potential from the context, and from his intuition, his observation had changed. And that's very, very symbolic of the left brain and the right brain. I think this is encoded in Golgotha, the skull. It was an anticipation of what would happen to the human race 2,000 years afterwards. I've talked about this. Golgotha, the place of the skull, etc. So the one on the left, which says to the universe, the robber, it's not going to paradise, unfortunately for him, but he says, you prove to me, to my satisfaction, he says to God or the universe, you prove to me, and then I'll be happy. But that's not the way spirituality works. You have to come into accord with it. You have to be the humble one. You have to open yourself up to the possibility, to the potential. And that's a mistake that people make. Come and prove to me, come and of course, you're correct, and I agree with you. This thing has to work. Whatever they come with has to be a real thing that works in the real world. So I'm very optimistic if we begin to now assert these things that we know are true.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like people could define it as synchronicity, coincidence, and you and I both know that those things are, two of the same. But it's like the realization there are none is the truth of it, because the synchronization is your attunement to the universe that gives you that feeling. And so it just gets right down to, forget about what you're reading, what you hear, from here what is good and bad, up and down, in and out, truth or false. And so, the constructs of how things are being molded within society today is, I think if you listen to that conversation I had with Father Nathan, was it Father Nathan?
Yeah.
We went over the, there's definitely, religion's getting a beating, but what people seem to forget is, once again, we're forgetting the human history timeline that, believing in something is better than nothing. And so that is a start, a seed that will blossom into something profound, no matter who you are. But the first, inclination is to be curious about what it is. What is it that I desire, what I want from my life, and if it's not giving me what I'm looking for, I'm experiencing things that I would think is negative. Let's discover what intuitively might be necessary for me to change the way that I experience this reality. And so many people tend to have been trained, and this is part of what you're talking about, through the programming that sort of like is layered into the very instruments that we're using, right? That the smartphone is really a way to track the individual and control the very information that they're experiencing and what they're experiencing, how they're experiencing. It's a tracking device. And it was sold to us as a way to, make our lives easier, perhaps. But, I think the sobering reality is that people are coming to the tipping point of, oh my goodness, this is not some Hollywood movie. This is really some type of like low frequency stuff that's actually taking place. We had a moment in history back in 2016 that, in my opinion, changed the world. And it changed the world to a point where whatever people are believing in relation to this, what I call low frequency type of stuff, it cannot operate. It cannot breathe. The expansion of consciousness, the higher resonance, will dilute, deconstruct, and dissipate whatever people are in fear of. And I will not move back from that position because, I sound like that sappy Hallmark card going, well, it's all about love. It's all about resonance. It's all about realizing we are one with all things. But you are me, I am you. And most people, when we say that right now, James, it's kind of like most people are like, oh, really? And in most situations, it's very subjective, in the sense that it's always subjective. Love to me is razor blades and bunny rabbits. To you, it's unicorns and rainbows. And at a certain point of resonance, a certain point of frequency, it will be a universal, unconditional state. And what happens is the more you operate in that, the more you embody that, the more you have access to that very resonance, it will be the perfect state that will basically dissolve the very limited sort of personality that you have perceived as yourself. It will start to seep into the infrastructure of the emotional and mental state that you think of it is controlling you from the timeline of your human experience, and then it will start to just oscillate there. And I think this is what the prophets are talking about, where there's a turning point where this resonance is getting higher, and there's a level of consciousness, and the people that are not observing that can catch up. They can play catch up at some point. I truly believe, from everything that Latsu has shared with me, that the prevailing of this state is nothing more than a matter of time, and that time is all that we're measuring in this 3D reality. Unless otherwise noted and you're operating outside of that, then space-time is not relevant. And you and I seem to have these epiphanies and synchronicities and serendipity moments where we are immune to time and space at certain points in our journey, where it becomes it's not even on the menu. So, I think I'd be interested to hear what you know, the prelude, priming of where we're going and what you perceive as the outcome, when it's quite evident that there's something going on that is apparent in society today that is bringing us to a higher point. Within Taoism, when you hit that resonance and you hold it, things that are subject to duality, it will become self-evident. So as a high resonance, if you're bringing in what we call the Tao, God, Buddha, life force, a high intelligence that is not measurable in this electromagnetic spectrum of this 3D reality. It is just something that is, you know, what someone would consider superhuman. It's just there. And so, you know, when a Taoist is really resonating at that state, profound miracles take place, manifestation, magic, healing, things, all things of that type of nature. It's just resetting things and having people remember, or having that moment in space-time being altered by this frequency that seems superhuman, but it's actually resetting everything. And that's why you have this epiphany, this miracle, this superhuman moment. What are your thoughts on that?
2016, I think it was, we went with the kids to Australia and New Zealand. We were camping for about 4 months. So I was sleeping on the ground every night. It's very, very good for coming into contact with the earth. And there was particularly about that time as well, or when I came back, I began to realize that I couldn't stay immune from affairs that were happening. I had to kind of come out, because I'd worked in law as my background. So I qualified in law, and I taught in law. I was a senior lecturer, and assistant professor, and I taught in universities in Britain, and, you know, guest professorships around the world, and at a high level. So in that process, I learned a lot, and I was meant to learn a lot about the nature of international institutions, and to understand what the plans are for us, and how these groups work, and you know, things that we're not meant to know, etc. So I began to get a picture of that, and about particularly in relation to 2020 and what happened, you began to see these things happen. But I wrote a book before that, a novel. You know, not many people have read it, but what is important for me in that was I had a sense that London would be in lockdown, and it starts with, there's a legal provision at the start of it, for example, which is not a real legal provision. I made it up at the time, which anticipates a lot of the legislation that has been introduced subsequently. So my intuitions about what's going to happen are very specific in relation to this unfolding of a very centralized, technocratic, globalist force using war to achieve its objectives, and willing to destroy billions, in my view, and I've written in the book called The Plantation of the Automatons. I kind of trace the origins of this back to the Normans, in particular, in France, coming through the British Empire, NATO, all that kind of stuff. So I've kind of specified the historical continuity, and in particular that influence on modern science, in particular the 1880s, where Babbage and all those people, where modern science came from, in the service of the empire, and in service of information administration, which grew up through the military-industrial complex that we see in Bletchley Park, and that, and the ideas of, okay, let's move it on now. And when Churchill in 1943 says the next empire is the empire of the mind, that committed to this. People don't understand how deep this is. The idea was they would take over the mind physically, physiologically, and change the human, because they realized they couldn't have military control of the whole planet. And this is clear from all the text. And this came from a rejection, in particular, go back to Thomas Huxley, 1863, the X-Club, take the spirit out of scientific discourse. It was a deliberate policy. And psychology came from that as a substitute, psyche instead of the spirit, for example. And there's been a constant erosion now. So if you read, I got a book from the university there the other day, and a very recent book about consciousness. And the main arguments, the leading neuroscientists are saying, now we have scientifically proven there's no such thing as the self. We know there's no such thing as the free. It's a total deconstruction of the human. And we have a lot of money going into post-humanism, which says that you don't exist. You know the way you used to be able to understand what a thing was in the past, but you don't now. And there's no such thing as a human. It was an illusion, a construction. This is coming on really, really quick. People don't understand how deliberate an ideology this is in global terms. And these are people that don't have an affinity to humans. They're misanthropic. They're mechanophiles. They love the machine. Some of them are occultists. They believe that they're serving other forces. So it's a dark force out there. So my intuitions, I'm writing to explain what I see on historical evidence and where we're going. And I've been right on some of the things just before in my predictions for the year in relation to Ukraine. Before I said there'd probably be a war in Ukraine. It was when it wasn't really on the agenda. A year before them, they started talking about monkeypox. I said monkeypox may be the next one. So you begin to use your intuitions to ally to discipline things. So I'm laying out the discipline stuff. There's the arguments. There's the sources. But this is in the context of utilizing your right brain, if you want, as well, to support it, utilizing the gifts that you have in the mystical terms, and according that with coming into accord with other prophecies, traditions, insights. So, for example, I've been very interested in Marian apparitions, and this has been very interesting stuff which has been hidden in relation to apparitions of the Virgin Mary, who, interestingly, in most of them, or in a number of them, says, your priests are bringing on the road to perdition. So it's not people say, the church are making these up. Well, a lot of them are fundamentally critical of the structures, and she appears out on the mountains in the places like where the Taoists went to. This return to the mountain is a critical idea in relation to a lot of spiritual traditions. So what's happening is an intense shift, also an intense choice. It's not difficult in a way, as you said, in relation to what you said about Lao Tzu, and in relation to not being fearful. And I'm not fearful, and people they seem to think sometimes that I'm living in fear of these things. I'm not. I'm just telling what I believe is. I have a duty to tell these. I'm not in any way. I don't care. I'm not afraid of death. I'm not afraid. There's certain things I wouldn't like to happen. I'd prefer if they couldn't, but you can't tell what's going to happen. I'm certainly not afraid of those things. But I have a duty because I know things to try and explain them or be a conduit for them. And we're not afraid of that. But there is a choice. There is a choice of which, if you want to put in simple terms, dark force, like whatever, the positive, negative, and whatever. There is a choice about where people are going, and it's a fundamental choice. And so the difficulty is not for the ones that have said they're going on a negative path, not for the ones that are going on a positive, integrative path. It's for the ones that are non-decided and believe that they can be, they can go with the flow, which is a different vortex. It's not the big vortex which is going to override these. It's a different vortex which is effectively a choice for the negative direction. So they're the people that I think are the greatest difficulty. Say, come and tell me, I can wait for the scientific proof of this, and then I will maybe make a decision of whether I will accord with the immortals and that. No, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. It's you have to have the humility, and you have to have the openness, and you have to have the willingness to learn from other people and from other contexts and other traditions, and to be open to it. So in that context, the positive thing is this synergy, this realization, this redevelopment of old senses of, as I said to you before, I was getting a sense of Lao Tzu coming in before. I was giggling away to myself, and I said it was unusual for me. I don't go around the house giggling, and I said this is Lao Tzu spirit. And you know this about coming into accord and what you can pick up on that. So there are people moving up as exemplars and flocking together on a different level, and that mystic murmuration, and they will influence other people. And the person that may change the world may be an office cleaner. It can be anybody. But what those people, how they will change the world is when they see things that are wrong, or they, and they know that there's a rightness, a right thing to do, a way to do. And as is clear in the Tao Te Ching, and this is something that I'm very appreciative from a legal context. When you have too many laws, there's no law. And that's what we have now. And so we're moving into a zero trust environment. So they're saying, oh no, we have no social relations and you can't trust anyone. That's why you need this digital thing. That's why you need the thing. Because if you have trust in a community, you don't need all these things. So you go from a trust, human value, to zero trust technology. There's a constant erosion of human values. So we have to be very, very careful about that. There's a word in relation to the use of, say, mobile phones, in relation to memory, epiphylogenesis with a French theorist came up. The idea that we're farming out our memory, and this is that's what we're doing. We are actually degenerating our mental capacity and putting it out there and being dependent on it. So this is a physiological thing. It's in Richard Dawkins' terms. If you he says, part of the gene is the extended phenotype, is what we create in the world, is the beaver's dam. So what they're doing is turning us inside out, and they're taking our inner world and putting it outside, making us dependent on the thing outside that they can control. And that's the danger, the subtle erosion of our capacities, our human capacity through that. And that's why we have to rediscover some of these old things. So at the same time as we're putting our memory into the mobile phones, I don't have one, but notionally, we go back and we see that the medieval magicians in Europe developed these capacities to remember things in the memory palace. And these things, not only did they use them to develop their memory, to remember things, to remember formulae, or to remember whatever they needed to know. But if you look at people like Ted Owens, and my friend Jeff Mishlove wrote about it in relation to the PK man, the psychokinesis. He was also big into memory, and he used to do memory shows, I think, at one stage, as far as I remember from Jeff's book. And he said that was important in the context of dealing with extraterrestrials or whatever, to have this capacity, because it protected you. So not only do these memory palaces protect your mind from possession, they create some kind of structures that make it difficult for other things. There was other reasons why they had memory, for example. So this sucking away, turning us inside out into external things, is also a prelude to our technical possession. So now they can marshal forces to technically possess us. So all that puts a premium on us understanding some of the things that you know about in relation to hypnosis, mind, etc., those powers, and putting a premium on those things, and a re-establishment of the value of those as a direct antidote, as part of the process, so we don't succumb. But people are going to have to make a choice, whether they say, okay, well, I don't believe that I have anything to contribute. I'm not important in relation. I don't have any consciousness that's relevant. I'm not I don't believe I'm going to survive after death, or there's anything in me that will, and I don't care. Give me the chip. That's fine. Make your choice, and I wouldn't recommend it. I believe, I believe that there are eternal consequences if you give away your soul. And there is a line in one of the books, the Taoist books, which says that the Tao and the soul are of the same essence, but the soul can be detached from the Tao. I think it's a brilliant statement of the idea of getting lost spiritually from the thing. Apologies for going on so long again there, Sam.
Not at all. I mean, you're bringing up all these incredible points, and it's sort of like when you start looking at, one of the first things to remember who you are is sort of regressing and observing the timeline of how you got to this point that kind of gives you a holy moly, here's my epiphany. First, I had a little seed of something, and that got me to stop. And I started to look around, and then I was like, well, this incredible glimpse of whatever it is, this magical moment, however it was, a synchronicity, a manifestation, a healing, a thought, a vision, seeing entities, channeling, whatever it was, it made you stop for a second and go, this has happened before. And then I look back on my timeline and start realizing, oh, this has been knocking on my door for as long as I've been breathing. Exactly. And so you start looking at these tools, and you mention these things. It's like, I always say that within, hypnosis is just a great gateway to mastering your ability to focus and do incredible things. It's an entry level. But what people need to understand is it's like, if you're emotional, you're suggestible. And so, marketing companies and political people on all platforms, quite frankly, people of influence have been using these tools since perhaps from a historical timeline, it's their conception. If you refer it to ancient Egyptian history, the one and only Thoth was like the hypnotic mastermind behind many alterations of consciousness. Now, I would, being a little biased, I would say there's the evidence of this type of states of trance within Taoist principles go a lot deeper. But people tend to look at, hypnosis as a dirty word. And quite frankly, when you start to sort of open your eyes and you start looking at some of these other tools that are sort of being sort of trickled out, very much sort of the mention of a state of mesmerized from a Mesmer, who was a hypnotist, a nonverbal hypnotist back in the day, I think in the 1800s. That's a sort of like, whoa, I use that all the time. I'm mesmerized. It's an effect that continually presents itself because these are echoing sort of like generational things that are implanted into our very thought processes through our DNA. And this, again, a concept that I would offer or suggest that someone to ponder over the DNA strand and exactly what's within your DNA strand and identifying it, back in the 60s. And then, hey, we're not just this flesh and blood. We go way beyond the subatomic particle. Look, we have this DNA, and now we're looking deeper. And, great thinkers and incredible thought leaders like, Bruce Lipton bringing forefront his playing around with stem cells and generating sort of an understanding of this epigenome and what does that really mean in the scope of human beings. But in essence, I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you in every level when it comes to the position of power in history that shows us that there's this sort of like ominous lower watt sort of energy has been attempting to possess our thoughts, feelings, and emotions for as long as human history. And it's become more evident now in the landscape of the world and what's going on and how things are being manipulated, because that's what I call it. There is a general sense of manipulation. And, I tend to find that the incantations, the spoken word, is one of the most powerful gateways to affecting change in all dimensions. With that, incantations, scripture, all this kind of stuff, you resonate with the very core of everything. It's a word, a number, a symbol, a letter. These are things that are resonating with you at your core. That then goes back to the reflection of what we speak of when it comes to epigenetics, understanding that, your thoughts can change, switch on and off your genes, your environment can change that. So these are sort of like catalysts that are really affecting your perception. And this comes back to what you were speaking of. So your perception is being altered very much so from all different angles, whether it's a device that you're using that you think is making your life easier, or the very programming of your environment. And I think it's kind of interesting how, media in of itself, especially news media, has sort of watched this, slow death and has lost control of the complete group thought and group thinking of the masses because of social media. And that kind of it turned into this uncontrolled sort of like organism that they're attempting to reel back in, but unfortunately that's not going to happen. So now you have people being awakened to the idea that, hang on a second, I was just listening to this podcast with James and San, and what this idea that what's hypnosis? I didn't even know what that was. Oh my goodness. Well, you know, I use it a lot when it comes to my kids. I show people. Now, I want people to understand hypnosis is just showing someone that you could shift gears in the states of consciousness. When I talk about ascension and channeling spirits and all that, that's a whole different ball. That's a whole different ballgame. We're just playing with what you do with your conscious and unconscious process. So that spectrum of the bigger picture is that, guess what? Your environment, what you're listening to, what you believe in, is being commandeered. And this is a defining moment right now by listening to our conversation, that you have a chance, a reprieve, an ability to get off the chopping block and step back and take a deep breath and realize that everything is not as it seems. And that's one thing that's within Taoism that's it's an echoing effect. We've always had this sort of like level layered of the way to walk is not the way. The name that's named is not the name. Giving people, the observer, the practitioner, whoever's listening to these very words, an opportunity to realize the true essence of all things is at first at face value, not as it seems, and a greater, more reference to looking in the mirror and realizing you are not of this body. And so it's kind of like, whoa, hope. And so now you bringing up all these incredible points of realization through human history and all the things that are taking place to commandeer our, almost at a thought police level, we're just that frog boiling in the pot slowly and not realizing that the idea of free will is being moved off the table, where you won't even have that idea, won't even be offered to you as a concept even. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's exactly right. It's the literature which is supporting the movement in AI basically says it's worse. There's no free will, there's no self, it's an illusion, and there's no such thing as a human. This it's quite incredible, but this is what's happening. And the reason, of course, why this is on the agenda is because your rights will be taken away, and the idea that you're equivalent and inferior to a machine is being put on the agenda, that they're conscious. They've been described as conscious agency. A lot of people think conscious agency is something which is very, very clever and enlightening. It's a dangerous part of this process.
I will say this, James, it's interesting because there are some interesting thought leaders right now that I've stopped and taken a breath in, and I've stayed at that center point when it comes to the information that they're disseminating. And it's not, they're using these very terms, sovereignty, conscious agency. There's a very interesting way that they're wordsmithing their message. And you bring that up and you start looking at what's around us, and this is going on. This is going on in a much deeper level. And some of these people are being recognized as really groundbreaking, sort of like, prophets.
Well, I have to plead guilty. I have to confess there in relation to sovereignty. I use that. The way I use it is as a antidote towards other ideas. Not in terms of this idea of the sovereign man and all that kind of stuff. Not interested in that personally. Could look to anyone that to take their path, explore their paths. That's not in relation to some of the ways other people use it. I qualify it by a personal sovereignty. This is what's being attacked, and sovereignty means to rule, basically. So that by the personal thing, I say that you have the primary right to rule your life. You must rule yourself. So the sovereign is not the sovereign out there; it's the personal sovereign. So that's the way I've used that. But I agree with you.
I understand what you're saying, but a lot of people are not using it in that context.
No, and they think I'm saying. I notice sometimes, he's one of. I say no, I don't. I'm explaining, and I have him in my literature. conscious agency, and I have asked specifically about this because I heard the conscious agency. So now we're going to have conscious agency. Well, what does that mean? And there's some people, and I say, listen, you're not listening to what the person is saying exactly. One of the ones is Terence McKenna. I get once it's like attacking the Pope or something. When I say Terence McKenna, and I say something, you're not really hearing what the man himself. I'm paying respect to him by reading what he said, and he's not saying what people think he's saying. You have to go, and as a lawyer, that's what you're trained in. That's what you're trained in. That's what textual analysis, looking at what they said. And they think he said something else because they liked him, but that's not good enough in the discipline thing. He was very much in favor of the end of humanity moving into technological thing through prosthesis, whether technology or psychedelics, whatever. Very, very much in favor of that. Conscious agency. Hoffman has written about conscious agency. Now he's very, very clear. If you read his book, but it's only in one sentence, he's saying consciousness is fundamental, and we're moving into an era of conscious agency. But one sentence says, but human consciousness is not fundamental. Utterly different to what he says that. Utterly different. So I asked on a Zoom call, I asked Federico Fagin. Federico Fagin, for people who don't know him, was one of the great innovators in relation to silicon chips and silicon gate technology. He was the one that developed these great Intel chips, the world beaters. But later he had a mystical experience, and he changed his view of priorities. So I asked him in a Zoom. He puts forward conscious agency, but he understands mysticism in the way that we understand it. So I said, but this thing about conscious agency, looking at what Hoffman said, he says human consciousness is not fundamental, as an exception. And he agreed with me that was the reading, and that he didn't agree with that. So there's two different things. But the conscious agency is merely a method to allow the recognition of artificial intelligence as a conscious agent with rights and with ways that will stop us interfering with it. So it's a very, very dangerous idea. That's why we have to emphasize the idea of the human, the idea of the human person, the dignity of the human, and the rights associated with that, and not give them up, because they're being taken away, they're being eroded, they're being denied, and it's very, very important. So I agree with you in relation to we have to be careful about those terms.
Well, because it buries a seed, right? So it's interesting you mentioned Hoffman, because that was the first person that came to me that uses that really as a throwaway. It's his every second sort of word is words is conscious agency, and it's like and you start hearing people just throw that around, but that's getting you to surrender everything.
And on that point,
without your knowledge, without your knowing, you're just like whoa.
That's correct, yeah, and it's not consciousness. So it's by looking at things you can measure, things you can identify in the outside world. And Fagin said he'd asked Hoffman about this thing, and there was clear disagreement on emphasis. So I'm not wrong on that. So my instinct is not wrong on that. But people say, "Oh, you don't understand. He really believes." No, you're not listening to what the man has said. And if you listen closely, which I had the respect when I did listen to various talk, he said when people realize the implications of this, they won't be happy, and they gloss over that because he's a nice man. He talks, and they say, "Oh, yeah." And there's a kind of hypnotic thing in relation to certain. No, I'm not saying he's doing it deliberately, but the effect is.
Oh, yes, he is. It's a pacing and leading, my friend. I mean, you're being very humble, and I appreciate that. But the truth is, there is an underlying messaging that's going on. And look, I don't have any problem with it. I realize that the resonance of you and I and our conversation and our understanding of the nature of reality will prevail over this low watt stuff, no matter what you say. And I will not subscribe to the idea that that low watt will ever prevail over the resonance that we speak of. And that belief system is the very core of my understanding of all things. And so when you do that, the belief system is all you have. If that's all you have, which is the truth, your truth as you know it, and you stand by it, you add to another level of resonance. So that Hertz level goes up. Another person connects with it, just as you said, the combining of these birds that will get into a flock. This is very much like a psychosis or a psychodynamic loop that you create within the energetic fields of humanity. So that person that's talking in a tone-like state, and what you would call that if you were in a crash course of Tony Robinson, Tony Wordsmith.
Tony, yeah.
Yeah, basically his wordsmithing would be, it's called pacing and leading. And you very quickly can take charge of someone. So let's bring everyone's attention to what we call mirror neurons. So if you're in doubt of this and you think that it's not a sleight of hand, like just throwing in a couple of words in a sentence, and you start getting on enough platforms where people are listening to you and you are getting hundreds of thousands of views, which is exactly what Hoffman is getting. And all of a sudden he's come out of nowhere as being this, genius of understanding of what really consciousness is. And I can define it. This, in my opinion, can be problematic when you're hitting hundreds of thousands of people. And so when it comes back to the wordsmithing, when it comes back to that synchronizing, all it takes is the mirror neurons. So that means that if you doubt what I'm saying, go to Starbucks, sit down at Starbucks, look at someone anywhere in the room. I don't care who it is. Now, poise yourself, put yourself in their very posture that they're creating. Start breathing at the same state they're breathing at, and you can find it very quickly. And within a few seconds, you'll start commandeering their very action. And they don't even know you're doing it. And this is what we call mirroring on a much deeper level. And you can get into the neuroscience of that. But basically, everyone can do it to everybody. And that's why like attracts like. And that resonance is so powerful and so very important to what James is talking about, which is, the future of humanity, of what is going to take place for mankind if we do not start to look at the subtleties that we speak of. So I'm not dismissing this. I know you're very humble about it, but the valid of truth will be resonant to the observer right now that's listening to this conversation. And I can promise you from the technical perspective, that's all it takes to commandeer someone's thoughts.
I was very interested in Ericksonian hypnosis and NLP. And I remember I was out one night with some executives, and one of them said to me, "Oh yeah, you're a painter. What's it like when you're painting in the how does it feel?" So I answered him. I assumed, I treat people, openly, and I give them the benefit of the doubt in any context, and I just take that as a normal thing. So as soon as I had told him, because I pay attention to the way people move, I noticed them doing this, and that was totally inconsistent. Now, I do really pay attention to people. That was inconsistent. And so I understood that he had asked me a question to apply this NLP to mirror me. I obviously must have done that. He was doing that, to do it. And he's thinking to himself, oh, how smart I am. So the effect of that, he wouldn't know that I had noticed that. But that would mean that my trust in him is zero after that, and I have no respect for him. And obviously, he underestimates my intelligence in that context, and I can appropriately quantify or put, assess where he is in relation and what his limitations are. So people doing these things, and cheap. Often you get it. Psychopaths, as you know, are very good at telling body language and are good at techniques and all that kind of stuff. But truth wins true in the end. But we can be taken. And an example I use is if another way, there's many ways we could think of what the Tao means, but in Christian terms, or in Greco-Rome or Greco terms as well, it could be identified with the logos, in the sense of, if we look at the Christian term, John's Bible, in the beginning was the logos, the word that's translated, but it's not. It's about the order in the universe. It's a deeper meaning. So what has logos now? It's been used, commercial logos. It's a substitution. We have all the time. So when a person hears the word logos, it's McDonald's and their commercial logos. It's a deliberate use of a word to replace a concept. It's a magical act. It's not accidental that these things come true. It's on a much deeper level. So people don't talk about the logos, and when they see that word, a secondary meaning is created as a substitute. This is the way of the world to create simulacra, of humans. Oh yeah, this robot is the same. This conscious thing is the same. This computer that we've made and spent billions of and have hundreds of people working on can now defeat a person, in a game. Well, it's not one person. It's all these other, etc., and it's still in a very limited context. And although it can purportedly write a poem, it's not a poem in any meaningful sense of a poem, despite how good or clever, how readable or interesting it is. This is the substitute that we were warned about in the Tao Te Ching. Even the thing which purports to be the thing is not the thing itself, and we can implicit in that is an implication that we can have a false thing which seems like the thing and is not the thing. So we have to go behind that. And there was a few things I was thinking about when you were, to mention in relation to the reality of these things, and it was about the context of Wu Wei in relation to people saying, well, what are these things? What are they? And actually, one of the things that I learned most from Taoism, in retrospect, you don't kind of pay attention, was the ability to relax. Now, I learned this in other ones. I learned this from yogic things and Patanjali and all this, but in a deep sense about the significance of relaxation in a way, in an embodied way, in emotion way, because a lot of the relaxation you learn in techniques are fixed, immobile context where you're sitting down, like in Zen and whatever. It's very, very good. But actually, motion is so important in Taoism, and as we know, as you know, in relation to Tai Chi and Qi Kung, it's the relaxation is embodied in the movement, and the movement reinforces a way to move. And an example, whether it's a good example or not, where I, in retrospect, say actually I learned something that I applied in this context from Wu Wei. To give an example, it's a long story. I'll give you a shortened version. A guy was meant to be showing me how to go on a bodyboard out in north of Spain. It turns out he didn't really know what he was doing. He got into difficulties. So I ended up, are you all right? And I ended up swept out by the riptide, which I didn't know about. I know about currents. I didn't know specifically. Everyone from Australia knows about the rip currents. So I was out. Soon I was out. He was okay. He was on the bodyboard. I was trying to help him like a fool, but I was literally just swept out. So very soon, all of a sudden, I'm out. Can't see the land. I'm in between troughs of waves which are as high as the ceiling here, and the waves every time are crashing down on your head, knocking you, and you can't see anything. And of course, you've been brought out on the thing. So what do you not do in that situation? Well, you don't panic and you don't waste energy. Thankfully, I'm a good swimmer, but that doesn't help, if you're in the wrong place. And as I said, I didn't know about these things, but what I did know was to relax in the context. Now, certainly, I can rationalize them in a number of different ways, and I could say the guardian angel was there, and I could say, and I believe in these things. I have no problems. I have no problems with the immortals being around and helping. But in relation to my mental thing, I think that this idea of relaxing in the thing was very clear. And not only that, I was very, very calm in relation to the thing. I was criticized. I was saying, what a foolish way to go. I was kind of making a joke to myself. I remember, what a ridiculous. Well, all of a sudden you're there and then you're gone. Out in it's kind of ridiculous in some sense, comic in a funny sense. And so you're in there in the trough, and you look down and you see a big U-shaped glassy green off in the distance, not knowing where you were, and not knowing what the best strategy to do is. But I again, in a non-thinking way, I knew that you had to conserve energy and you had to not waste your energy. And I believe that was something which was inherent in deep from reading the important was how you respond. And eventually, as you know about these things, you're drawn back out. It still doesn't. You're still far out, and you have to go back. But the thing takes you out, and then you have the possibility of swimming back, not against that. It doesn't mean that it's easy, and it's certainly when you can't see where you're going, but you have an option. Thankfully, it worked out well. But this is what they say. This is what they say about going through the whirlpool. It's all there in the Taoist text. You don't fight against the whirlpool. You go with it, and you'll come out. And that's deep in it. Or the drunken man falling off the cart. It's deep in the idea that you have to pick the forces that you oppose. You have to not oppose an unopposable force in an incorrect way. You have to sometimes accede to that and then choose your moments. So in relation to people saying, well, what's all this stuff about? Really, in a few contexts, this type of thinking, I would say, enables you to relax in a circumstance where you need to relax. Some other emergency situations, you just have to run and whatever, and you have to flight from a particular danger. Some other contexts, you don't. You have to deal with the present moment in a way that's appropriate. And the tendency to panic or to do the wrong thing or to swim against the current, is the wrong thing to do. I also, there's a point as well, this is laid out in particularly in Japanese philosophy, and you can see it in films like Kurosawa, and the mountaineers climbing up the mountain and they're dying and they're getting over, and then the beautiful woman comes and she starts covering you. And this is nice, go to sleep. And I did hear a bit of this. The sea begins to say, oh, let go, it's okay. Just let go. It'll be easy for you. You just come. It won't be difficult. Just let go. Just give up. That's what that thing happens in relation to you begin to hear the force of the thing. And that can be a seductive thing. And a lot of people will give up to these forces. That's a hypnotic thing of the nature. But another context, say a similar situation, where I was working on a bar in the East End in London, rough place. Cut long story short, this gang came in that was after me because I had refused a guy, and I could see this coming in. I was surrounded. It was one of these like in Cheers, where you're in the center. No other people there, no other person staff that I could talk to. No, I was in the context of first a gang coming around saying, what's this about? And then a guy came in at the end who I had barred from the place. So, and around there at the time, they used to go around and, baseball bats and knives and all that, if they didn't like the barman. I mean, it was kind of rough. So I knew that I was in difficulty. I knew that I was, and as well as that, two guys at the bar who'd come up who were part of this, I began to realize that they were all together. They didn't look me in the eye, and that never happened. In all the times, all that kind of work, a person doesn't look you in the eye when they're ordering something. They can be occupied, but they will glance you. So I knew there was all the alarm bells were off. So the thing not to do is to begin to panic, and certainly one can look at if I was going to go to the next world, there'd be someone else joining me in that context. I'd make sure that at least. But As it happened, there was a guy came in that I used to talk to. He just used to come in. He was African chap, lived in the Caribbean or Caribbean background. He just used to, he didn't drink. He came in to talk to me. He'd come in every now and then and say, how are things? Nice day. How you keep? That was it. We had a lovely conversation about nothing. And he walked in and sat down in a place where he could talk to me. And as it happened, as it's transpiring in the context, he's unaware of all this kind of stuff that's going to kick off. And he sits down, he starts talking. But he was a very big guy. He was very, I don't know what he did, but he had a kind of bodybuilder's back, and he was a big guy. And what happened was they, I believe, began to think he was a bouncer, because there would be bouncers in some of the place. And the guy that was out to get me, obviously he was meant to come in. I was saying, you're the guy that, because he had thrown a thing on me before, and a big glass thing on me before. So I was meant to say, I'm not serving you. I'm going to call the police, and then that would kick off like that. But I didn't. I served the guy because I realized that a different strategy, a different tactic was needed. And then that confuses them, because that wasn't what was meant to happen. And then they begin to look at my friend that I talked to and think he is. This is where I'm rationalizing their thought process. He's comfortable because that guy is a security guard, and he could be, he could be armed even in certain places. There was guys that would have. So anyway, cut long story short, they disappeared, and I saw them looking at him. One of them came up and said something to this guy who I hadn't told anything to, and then they went. Now, the point was that it's an interesting thing. If I hadn't talked to that guy beforehand, just an ordinary conversation, just a normal conversation, he wouldn't have come in to talk to me. This is about the value of sociability, of talking to people, of of just being nice to people, just greeting people as you find them. He wouldn't have come in. So there's a kind of there's a karmic element to that. And secondly, if I had responded to them with the things that I should have responded in a reactive manner, then it would have kicked off. That would have been the thing. So again, I think that these things are not about how you relax after you've done your busy. This is not what this stuff is about. You can see it in all the writings in the Japanese context, or in the art of war, and the Chinese things about the warrior. They have to be able to put themselves in a relaxed state so the flow can come when they're dealing with a life and death situation. And people will encounter these things in normal context, and they have to be able to relax and to let the situation unfold, and that the cognitive brain and what you should do in those contexts will not work unless you have an ability to relax. So that type of response is I would accord it or say that it accords with the Wu Wei, or the effortless, or or that going with the flow bit.
100%. I mean, not that I go out of my way. I mean, I can teach people Bagua, Tai Chi, other martial forms. They don't excite me.